Yeah, you never consider these kinds of things. Like the language is another completely like different one. But one of the things that strikes me about a lot of the ideas that, or the sort of tidbits from history, or these like undiscovered people, or unknown stories, is that I often like look at them, like even reading just random ones on Wikipedia sometimes with friends of mine. Like the one that springs to mind is the British Army officer who used to go into war with a samurai sword, and play in the bagpipes. I cannot remember his name. I will link it in the description for anyone who's interested. And I read or hear these stories from history, and I go, that would make the most stunning film. And that would be so much better than some of the trash that people come up with for like Hollywood blockbusters. I'm like it's all there. It's like you've all the motivations, the characters, the history, the event. It's like it's all written for you, and yet people choose to kind of ignore this. Why do you think that's not like more of a source for dramatizations on
Yeah.
screen?
I mean, maybe that story is that the story of Lord Lovett landing on D-Day, because he landed with his Highland bagpiper playing "Road to the Isles" as he landed on D-Day, I mean, under fire. It's completely extraordinary. And because I did a book on D-Day, there was other ones who one landed with his hunting rifle, or, instead of an army, his hunting rifle. It's quite extraordinary. And then mad things like one guy I read about, he landed with a gramophone, and like that evening, on the evening of D-Day, 6th of June, 1944, he had put sort of wind-up gramophone on, and they're all drinking beer in the evening. And they're just so incongruous, these stories, when you've just read about the horror, the slaughter that's taken place, that day on the beaches. And then in the evening, he's putting his wind-up gramophone on, and they're listening to jazz or whatever. It's weird. But I love those stories. And those are what bring things to life, and they make history accessible, I think, because people can identify with those weird, quirky stories.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, being able to, because you can, I like the bagpipes one just amazes me. I mean, like because the thing I always get in my head is that vision where there was the Germans sitting in the bunker at the cliffs at Normandy, and they hear this weird like drone. I'm like, what's that noise? Like, it's not an engine. It's not a plane. It's not a gun. And then they just see this guy like strolling up the beach with his bagpipes.
Yeah. And like Lord Lovett turned to him and said, "Can you play Road to the Isles?" And Bill Millin, the piper, he just said, looked at him like, "Are you completely mad?" And he said, "No, I want Lord to the Isles as we land." And he became known as the Mad Bastard. In fact, Bill Millin. And the reason later, two Germans who were captured on that beach, Sword Beach, they were interviewed, and they said they didn't shoot him because they thought he was a lunatic. Basically, they thought he was mad, and so they thought it would be mean to shoot him. But yeah, Lord Lovett, he was extraordinary. Lord Lovett. Now, this is an interesting point. Lord Lovett was extremely keen to write his own legacy in history, and so he has a prominent role in the film The Longest Day, which was the classic sort of war movie, The Longest Day, based on Cornelius Ryan's book about D-Day. Now, who was the historical consultant for Hollywood for that film? It was none other than Lord Lovett. So if you're the historical consultant, you can certainly write yourself a big part for the film. And so I think, it's quite interesting that many of the men who served under him were pretty furious that Lord Lovett had written himself big into the story and written them out of the story. So being the victor and being able to write the account of what happened is very important, I think.
So what keeps you motivated to keep writing? Because, like, as I mentioned before, you're pretty prolific. Like, you keep pumping out books with, well, obviously history is a fantastic source of stories, but what keeps you motivated to keep writing, like to keep discovering these stories and like putting them on paper for other people to enjoy?
I really, really enjoy crafting a story. And it's very interesting when you're dealing with, history, you've got facts that constrain you, basically. That they are your parameters. But going for all the sort of curios, the oddities and everything, enable you to build up a story, build up a narrative, but also in my books, the characters are really, really important. And so I read a lot around the characters. I try and find as much input about them as I can find. So you really are dealing with a sort of flesh and blood person. I think that's really important. And also the lesser known stories as well, I think bring an added dimension. So to take the book I did on D-Day, so many books on D-Day tell the story from the Allied perspective. Generally, if they're American authors, they tell it from they virtually don't mention the British at all. It's an American operation. And the British tend to obviously to focus on the British beaches and everything. But no one talks about the Germans, or very little about the Germans. And I wanted to tell the story of the German defenders, who many of whom were 16, 17-year-old conscripts and absolutely petrified, when they saw the massive flotilla coming towards them. But also other voices as well, which haven't been heard. For example, that coast of Normandy is dotted with villages, and they were full of people at the time of the D-Day landings. And I want to tell the stories of, the mothers and the children who were there, who found themselves, facing the biggest naval bombardment in the history of warfare, and what it was like for them. And in fact, many, many years ago, I'd been sent out there for the 50th anniversary, was it 60th anniversary? I can't remember. I was sent out there to interview a lot of the French civilians who were living there at the time. And it was absolutely fascinating to hear their stories. So I think giving a multi-perspective angle is fascinating, and it hasn't been really done until recently. So that's what I like to concentrate on, really.
So how long does it take you to go from like the first time you open that file in the archive and you find Operation Unthinkable, for example? How long does it take from conception, like when you first discover like a little piece or a little nugget of information or a little idea, to be deciding, okay, this could be a full narrative work, and then to publication? Like, how long does that process take you?
It's quite a long process. I'd say the research and writing of a book is about 2 years, and it's sort of roughly a year is research and a year is writing, although it's not quite as neat as that. But also, it's of course, you have to persuade a publisher that they want to publish this book, and I'm lucky enough to be published both in the UK and in America as well. And so it has to be a story that's going to interest Americans as well. So there is, there's always a commercial angle to these things. But the most important thing of all is it has to be a subject that absolutely fires you with passion and enthusiasm, because when you read a book, you can tell if the author is absolutely passionate about the subject, because it just comes across in the writing. And so I would never embark on anything that I just didn't really, really want to tell the story. That's the most important thing of all.
So what is is there like a particular favorite that you have like sitting on the back burner that you haven't got to yet, or a story that you haven't quite understood how to like turn into a full book yet, or something that is undiscussed or undiscovered as yet?
Well, I've got loads of sort of half ideas. I have a file of half ideas, and which require more research to see if they'll work as a book. I don't know. It's difficult. It's great to sit down with my agent and my editor as well to discuss these things, because it has to work for them as well. But yeah, I'm looking for ideas at the moment, actually, for a new book. I've got to keep a bit tight-lipped, really, on this subject.
Okay, I see. You want to keep it nice and play your cards close to your chest. So then, aside from things you're maybe working on, what is the best unknown story or character from history that maybe doesn't get picked up on, even in your works? Like your favorite sort of your favorite one that you've talked about in a book thus far that is unknown, or just out of left field.
Oh gosh, I mean, the story I really enjoyed doing was the story of in Russian Roulette, which was the story of British spies working undercover in Russia just after the revolution. And that's a story that has not been written about very much at all. And it's absolutely fantastic story, real James Bond stuff of, men living undercover in disguises. It's, fantastic story. And I think that whole area, that whole period is really interesting, and there's still much more to be written about that. I mean, a character who hasn't been written about and is fascinating is Maria Rasputin. I didn't realize that Rasputin had a daughter. And she ended up living in America. And she ended up emigrating to America. And so, of course, did Prince Yusupov, who killed Rasputin. And they ended up in a massive legal battle because Yusupov wrote this book about what a disgraceful, man Rasputin was, and how he needed to be killed, blah, blah, blah. There's a whole story there. And then Maria Rasputin sued him for sort of black naming, a father. So that's a sort of story I think that is, be worth looking at. These two characters who've lived together in Petrograd and St. Petersburg, end up sort of doing battle in the law courts first in Europe and then in America. That's one I'd like to read about that.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, follow me on Twitter, or sign up to our mailing list. Thanks a lot to our sponsor, ExpressVPN, the #1 most trusted VPN. Get lightning fast connectivity with servers in 160 locations across 94 countries. Keep your browsing privacy safe with ExpressVPN and get a 35% discount on 12 months of ExpressVPN when you follow the link in the description below. Don't forget my book is now out and available to order on Amazon and on bookshop.org. That's Brexit, the Establishment Civil War. And most importantly, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.